Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining in on this new edition of Harnessing Happiness. Sorry for the delay. We've had massive technical issues, but we got them all taken care of. And once again, I want to thank everyone for who will be logging on watching this. We are a few minutes behind, but my name is Dr. Eric Charlton. I have created the Harnessing Happiness platform as a way of showcasing our complexity, of displaying our journeys, and really magnifying those complexities as men, as Black men, and for us to learn and grow together. Some of our obstacles and adversity can be the stepping stones for something far greater and bigger. So I just want to welcome everyone again. I have a very special guest this evening, Mr. Patrick Weaver. Met him last year, and just a phenomenal speaker, phenomenal story, great storyteller, and wanting him to talk about, of course, his happiness, but we'll dive into some of his background, some of his thoughts and theory around his happiness. Real quick, I want to read his bio. I'm not going to read the whole bio. It's very extensive, but just want the audience to get a glimpse of the man that I'm talking to. Patrick Weaver has his own ministry. He has a reach of over 2 million people. And he has a transformational and empowering message of hope, healing, and power. The one thing I like about his bio that really resonates with me is it talks about the complex mixture of spiritual, physical, social, mental, and emotional components that makes us human. And I think that's so powerful and so relevant to who we are as individuals. He's an outspoken advocate and a leader in the fight against domestic abuse. He is a certified domestic violence counselor, a trauma-informed specialist, and a consultant who's dedicated to shifting mindsets and amplifying the voices of victims of domestic abuse. Once again, just a phenomenal gentleman, and I really thank him for offering his thoughts and opinions and his expertise around happiness. So, Patrick, thank you this evening, and I'll just go ahead and get started. Just okay. What was your earliest, well, actually, before I ask you about anything about happiness, can you dive a little bit more about your bio and your history?
Yeah, I think, as we all come from something, we all have a background, we all have a history. Mine was watching my mother be abused for 20 years, nearly 20 years. In fact, she was abused up until the day my father died, which was shortly before my 18th birthday. So I was launched into adulthood with what were discovered traumas, right, from that experience. And I think it in and of itself not only caused me to really embark on healing in general, psychology, but more importantly, how God is interwoven into that, and how faith becomes our source for walking out our happiness and healing. It isn't our happiness and healing, but it is the source or the catalyst or the foundation, right, for walking it out. And I had that background in order, I should say, I had that background to motivate me to discover this very thing, and that is, what is our happiness, right? It certainly isn't perfect life, or conditions or circumstances. And that really is what I bring to, as well, the fight against domestic abuse, in helping individuals to kind of discover their independence, their happiness independence from circumstance and or individuals, so that they can discover who they are, right? Independent of relationship, independent of title, wife, husband, daughter, but who are you? Because that ultimately is what's going to define your happiness, because all of those other titles have conditions.
Wow.
And so that by itself kind of brought me to this point of happiness is not our condition, but it's our position.
Powerful. Not our condition, but our position. Love that. What were some of your earlier obstacles that you had to overcome to capture your happiness?
I think for myself and a lot of us, it's discovering who we are and defining happiness in terms of, as I said before, a position, a foundational belief, an immovable belief, right, in who we are and how our life reflects that in terms of our purpose, our how we show up every day to fulfill the purpose that represents who we are as people, right? And I think for me, initially, and I think for a lot of us Black men, it was having to figure out what a Black man meant, what being a Black man and being one of Black excellence, what that meant without a role model. And I think for a lot of us, we struggle around really discovering our happiness through identity, because we did not have someone in the home to role model that for us, and so we're then ushered into adulthood with all of these misconceptions and dysfunctions that we ultimately have to shed before we can find identity and subsequently, our happiness.
Wow. What were some, well, how do you maintain your happiness now, Patrick?
It's a funny thing because I'm always talking about this. I'm literally always talking about this because we exist, in this paradigm of, happiness is ultimately what defines us as individuals and or the quality, if you will, of our day. And I really don't define happiness as in happiness is not predicated upon what's happening, but happiness is predicated upon joy, right? Gratefulness, gratitude, and being able to know and recognize no matter whatever else is going on, there is something to be grateful and to be thankful for. I even, approach, I'm an entrepreneur, so I approach my day with just being thankful, but that I have the gift, the talent to do what I do, no matter how hard that might be, how difficult that might be, how many hours that might be. The mere fact that I'm a Black man with the ability to compete and to do so on any stage or platform, as with you or others, we're blessed. And we have to find those things within our reality, in our here and now, that we can focus on and be grateful for. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And that's something that we have to do daily.
Awesome. You are absolutely correct. It's a daily walk and daily navigation, daily journey.
Right.
In your evolution, were there some things that you had to sort of quelch or suppress for you to get to a standard of happiness that you were able to I guess magnify, or that you were satisfied with, I should say?
Yeah, I think when we come from different backgrounds and maybe even come from, like I said before, a background where we didn't have, male, particularly Black male role model for us. And we then, get launched into adulthood with misconceptions and dysfunctions. One of the things that I had to definitely deal with is really an insecurity from as a result of being unfamiliar. So I was winging, really. I was winging being a Black man. You know what I'm saying? Because I didn't have any quote unquote teaching. So I was winging it as I kind of latched on to different folk who represented at least what I idealized and or what I had imagined that Black excellence in Black males to be. And I think for me, that was very pivotal because a lot of us haven't found our mentor. And as a result, whether that mentor be virtual, whether that mentor be through books or however we do it. But at the end of the day, until we do, we've got to fake it until we make it, and we don't have feedback knowing we're not doing it right.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? And that was one of the things that I really had to, get past, get beyond, and develop really a sense for, how do I find resources for things that I'm inadequate, that I don't have, or that I'm inadequate, or that, it's not something you just wear on your shoulder or, wear on your sleeve. But you need to fix this. You know what I mean? And doing that probably was one of the greatest boosts to my own happiness. And that was really connecting with folks who I could glean from.
Right. And I love the fact that you mentioned that insecurity, because I think that, that is for a lot of us, males, especially Black men, it's a shared experience of, I said this in earlier discussions about, I lost my father when I was 6. So definitely not having that role model, that guidepost per se, to understand, what makes us happy, and also what some of the things that I was going to encounter as I got older. Is shared. I think it's a shared experience for us.
Right. And that by itself, I think, is what almost feels like a setup, because, we know things that kind of almost appear and or that we go through what seems like happenstance that we go through it. But then later on, we realize it was really more so about what we didn't know. Right. You know what I mean? And I think that's one of the things that is missing in our community and for Black men, because I deal with a lot of couples, but mainly women, on the subject of relationships. Rarely are we at the table of those discussions. And it leaves kind of almost the impression that not only are we not happy, but we're not even interested in being happy, because we're never at the table, seemingly, where those discussions are, particularly when it comes to how we as men evolve, grow, develop, mature, so that we can be these kings, so to speak, in actuality rather than in theory.
Right. How has happiness? It's an interesting question. How has happiness showed up for you during your life?
It shows up for me when I encounter something that I know otherwise would have taken me out. It would have caused me to, at least be negatively affected, and or my response would have been a whole lot different had I not remembered my happiness. And when I say remember, meaning I am my happiness, right? And as we develop a strength in that understanding, we encounter those instances where, if we're not in control of our happy, somebody else is. And so that's one of the keys to, owning our happy, embodying our happy, and it being our position rather than our condition. Because otherwise, circumstances and people are given arbitrary control over our happiness. And even, throughout a given day, we can encounter things that otherwise will cause us to be, all over the board, up and down, like a yo-yo in terms of our happiness. And that's just emotionally unhealthy.
Right. And that's why I'm so interested in this topic, especially for a Black man, because we are, to some degree, we do get some of our social cues and some of our leaning from other people, from outside sources, and the trick is not to become identified with that.
You're right. Learn from, but not become.
Yes. So what has your wisdom taught you about your happiness?
For me, it's always been about almost like it's self-esteem, self-love, self-care. Yeah, the operative word is self. I own it.
Yes.
And if we do not own our happiness, as I said before, then we're subject to, and happiness is predicated upon what's happening, as opposed to us being in control. Because happiness that we own is a different kind of happiness.
Yeah.
Because it's independent, right, of whether or not you like me, whether or not I'm as good as you. Independent happiness enables us to grow and mature with the willingness to actually be vulnerable. I don't care if you know more than I do. And I don't care, if I didn't come from, your background or whatever it might be. But when we own our happiness, we're able to grow and mature by being vulnerable.
Right.
Because our confidence is in the fact that we own happiness being our position in that regardless hell or high water, I'm great. I'm content. I'm fulfilled. I'm blessed. I'm able. And because that's the foundation of my happiness, I love to be around people that know more than I do. I love it. and it has paid dividends, right? But if I were not able to be independently happy, as in owning my happiness, that insecurity would kick in, right? And it would cause me to avoid certain people and or environments, and therefore denying me the opportunity really to glean, right? Yeah. Because I always say, our greatness really is knowing what we have going for us, perfecting it, and then simultaneously eliminating all weaknesses. And unless we can own our happiness, we will never put ourselves in the position to eliminate our weaknesses.
Wow. You done said something. I was thinking about when you said owning it. How do you think with your work in with domestic abuse, how do you think that shows up when someone, whatever party it is not owning up to their personal happiness?
In a lot of instances, that's basically that's what it is. It's an outsourced. We get to that point, or when we don't own our happiness, we have a tendency to outsource it, wholesale it, or discount it for various and different things, whether that be a relationship, whether that be attention, or just getting into our fears, right? When we are independently happy, we also have to own the responsibility for reinforcing. That's the other aspect of happiness that falls on our shoulders when we own it. We are not waiting for someone to make us happy. And in the arena of domestic abuse, if you can't respect my happiness, I have to create a boundary, if not enforce one, that removes you if you threaten my happiness.
Mm.
You see what I mean? Because ownership also comes with responsibilities.
Yes. Wow.
And that's one of the greatest needs and even subjects that I think, you know, especially in the domestic violence arena, and with Black men, you know, without owning our happiness, we can be some aggressive individuals because our internal insecurities can be threatened, causing a reaction that is not really reflective of our happiness or of our strength or of our power or of our intelligence. You know, we have various and different situations with cops pulling Black men over, and those situations turning violent and causing or leading to death or murder. And then we have other Black men that are pulled over also, who can hold their own in a conversation that represents ownership again, right? I'm Black. Yes, I'm offended, but let me show you what Black and offended, confident and happy looks like.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And there's a different response you get from a Black happy man than you do from a you know, angry or otherwise maladjusted, arrested development. There's a difference, right? This is an important aspect of our maturation. We think, you know, we're maturing to become a man, but in reality, we're maturing to become happy. Happiness produces the man.
Happiness produces the man. Wow. Yeah. That in terms of if you were to talk to your future self about what you know about happiness, what would you tell him?
You know, surround yourself with as many people as possible who embody happiness. Not material, not dependent on material things, but true happiness that resonates from their character, their disposition, their mentality, their attitude, and the way they handle themselves in adversity.
Yeah. Yeah. From my research on happiness, it's now happiness is, you know, that definitely coincides with it's not just the absence of unhappiness, it's learning to cope with the adversity that is going to come. You know,
It's gonna come.
you're not going to get around it.
Not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Not gonna happen.
In terms of your life, you know, as we have a few months left in this year, is there anything you need to take away from to add to your happiness for the rest of the year? Is there something that you encountered or you experienced this year that you need to take away?
That you say something that I encountered that I will take away or add?
Yeah. No, take away.
Remove.
Remove, yes.
You know,
yeah.
One of the things that I will you know, take away, as in learn from,
Yes.
is being more intentional about self-care. because that for me is an important factor in terms of happiness.
Yeah.
And ideally we work hard, whether to make money or whatever else, we do. But my takeaway this year is I work hard to gain more time to self-care, right? So for me, maintaining balance is important to my happiness, and feeding that through self-care allows for me to be intentional.
Love
And
it.
so for me this year, it's about being intentional.
Love it. Love it. And that quality of time, I can definitely respect and relate, because I
Yeah.
value that time, my time tremendously.
Me too.
So,
Me too. Me too. Tremendously.
I only have a finite window of time. And
Yeah.
I like to make my time very meaningful and
Me
valuable
too. Me
to what
too.
I love. And so
Me
you
too.
yeah, just I love it. The one thing you talked about was, in terms of being unhappy. I think that being happy takes a higher degree of energy. You
It
have to
does.
sort of spend that energy in being happy, versus, because there's so much in our lives that we can get mad at or blame others for, or misstep.
Right.
But
Right.
it takes a higher degree of energy to maintain happiness.
Exactly. A whole lot more energy. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's difficult for most, right?
Yeah.
Is because it is an intentional act. And a part of that intentionality means we have to let a lot of stuff go
Yes.
that other folk will hold on to, belabor, and or be led away by. Happiness is very intentional, and as you said, it requires an enormous amount of energy because of what we have to let go of or not accept as part of our normal, or as a part of whatever someone might be trying to do. We have to let so much go until sometimes it can cause us to feel as though, we're not standing up for ourselves, or we're not, putting a, fork in the ground, or doing something, that we should be doing. But in reality, like you said, happiness is owning power, knowing you can use it, but not wasting it.
Not wasting it. Love it. You mentioned something, and I want you to repeat that. You said something about wholesaling it. I
Right.
want you to try to repeat that, because that was very powerful.
Yeah. I have these discussions a lot in the domestic violence arena, in that our happiness, when we, don't own it, we're subject to accepting discount coupons in terms of behavior that qualifies for the privilege of us. And that's one of the things that, when we own our happiness, it also means the privilege of me comes with responsibilities. And so the less we own intentionally that happiness, the more likely we are to discount our value or allow folk in our presence who don't qualify for our happiness, the privilege of us. Because in order to maintain our happiness, as you said before, it requires a whole lot of energy, a whole lot of work.
Yes.
So that's the privilege of us. And once we embrace and understand that, the work, the energy, the effort to maintain our happiness, we cannot accept discounts in terms of behavior that we allow in our lives, people that we allow in our lives, because they are receiving the privilege of that happiness or that work that goes into that happiness. And a lot of times in domestic violence situations and or relationships in general where there's an imbalance of power, there's been a wholesaling or a discount of happiness, almost to the degree where happiness has been outsourced.
Wow.
And so this individual has more or less now owns basically our happiness is in their pocket. And whoever they are, we then become subject to how they treat us. That's what's going to determine my happiness, how you treat me.
Right.
When the truth is, my happiness is going to determine how you treat me. You're not going to determine how you treat me when I own my happiness, because happiness also produces boundaries.
Wow.
And the less we then own that happiness, the less we are then to not only have boundaries, but be willing to reinforce them. It requires an enormous amount of happiness, independent of people, to enforce boundaries.
Wow.
Because you've got to be willing to lose what you wanted. And if you're not happy with you, that is not a price that you will pay for your happiness.
Wow. And that is easier said than done. And that takes such a growing process, because I can speak to just, for me in terms of when I was younger and, especially in a young marriage and placing emphasis on my mate versus making sure that I was filling my cup up, making sure I was making sure that my personal foundation was stable, and my wife would provide an additional, sort of icing on the cake. But if you don't, like you said, if you don't have that inner work, that foundation of what generates happiness for yourself, is very tough to seek it, and it's so easy to try to seek it in others.
Absolutely. And outsource it.
Yes.
And outsource it. And to the place where I've said to some folk one time at a conference, I said, when that happiness gets outsourced, the individual no longer even is a partner. They're a drug dealer. And they sell you back your happiness to the place where you get addicted to the control of your happiness by them. And so when they withhold your happiness, they can coerce and manipulate you into performing, doing whatever they want you to do, because your performance is how you get your fix of your own happiness.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, you're giving to others what belongs to you, and you have to buy it back by wholesaling yourself, by discounting yourself, by allowing yourself to accept less than what you deserve, because they own your happiness, and the only way that you can be happy is by doing what they want you to do, which even includes disrespecting yourself.
And then you get into a perpetual state of wanting,
Absolutely.
cycle.
Then you start feeding.
And it never can quite satisfy that thirst.
Because they're only going to give you crumbs anyway. They're not going to give you a full course meal of your happiness. They're going to give you crumbs, because that's training you to keep, feeding, keep coming, because you can never be filled up when someone owns your happiness, because in order for them to own you, they can only give you a little bit at a time. They would
Wow.
never give, they can only let the slaves go so far. They won't give them a pass to go to the other side of the country. You can't go to northern part of the US, but you certainly could go over to the master's house that was around the corner. When people own your happiness, they will only let you go so far. They will only let you be so happy. And you have to keep coming back for a little bit at a time because they own it.
Right.
They own it. And that's the danger of us not owning our happiness and recognizing that, you know, our happiness is what says the privilege of me comes with responsibilities.
Wow. I love that. The privilege of me comes with responsibilities. And we all have to own up to those responsibilities.
There is no, see, happiness is not free for us. That's why we can't give it away for free. That
Wow.
happiness represents our oil. We were crushed for that happiness. So it's not free. And so we can't give it away for free and or even offer a discount.
Wow. Wow. I'm about to say amen on that, but how has your spirituality helped or feed your happiness?
You know, and I try to, because I talk to a diverse group of people, you know, I weave in my spirituality, but I lead with humanity, because that is what we all have in common, right? Is our humanity. For me, my spirituality is what I rely on and use as reinforcement for my value and the privilege of me. I'm created in an image. I am the child of a king. I have the anointing and I'm filled with the Holy Ghost. So I respect the fact that my happiness is not really superficial. It's actually rooted in my beliefs. And so that gives me the ability then to deal with both, whether saved, unsaved, and or whether they believe or not. Because as we had said before, in order for us to fan the flames of our happiness, we have to do a lot of work. We have to put in a lot of energy, and we have to go through actually a lot of things that others don't. That actually gives us the ability to be more like most people than just spiritual people. Because a lot of spiritual folk don't do the work. They just believe. Folks who do the work and believe it or not, I always say, have more in common with the average person, because everybody has one thing in common: you will do the work.
Right.
And so my faith also reminds me of the fact that my happiness, just like my faith, without works is dead. It takes work to be happy. It's intentional, right? As well as it takes work for us to walk out our faith, you know? And so I really leverage off of my faith for the confidence and reinforcement that I need when I'm actually working on my happiness, because we will get nothing without work.
Yes. Yes. It's a, as you said it, a personal construction project.
Yeah, listen, ongoing, full time.
Yes. Do you have any parting wisdom for younger Black men who will listen to this or hear this? I'm talking about, late teens or 20s, young men who may be struggling.
You know, I think that's an area for us as Black men that we really have to focus on, because, you know, that is a group that we know to a large extent, they don't have role models. This stuff is not being role modeled in their home or by a father figure, right? And a lot of these young men are lost in a world that does not give them the reinforcements and or the understanding of who they really are.
Right.
Because that becomes the prerequisite to this happiness that we're talking about. Who are you? And I think as far as the young men are concerned, one of the things that I would say and always do say, allow yourself to step outside of your circle. Acknowledge that there is a world and people outside of your comfort zone. Be willing to associate yourself with what is uncommon, unnatural, and different from what is in your circle, so that you can allow yourself to then be exposed to greatness in different arenas, in different capacities, that you will find parts of yourself or identify with different aspects of those environments. And they will inform the average one of us, the combination of all of those experiences and that exposure. It will start to help us to identify and to understand who we really are, because we're not our zip code.
Yes.
We're not the block we were raised on. We're not, the group of friends that we grew up with. We're much bigger than that. We have a bigger purpose than that.
Yeah.
But we won't be able to put it all together, piece it all together, unless they allow themselves to get outside of your comfort zone and be willing to associate your greatness with folks that you would not normally interact with, normally deal with, normally see on a regular basis, because there is something in those unfamiliar places that will cause you to become familiar with who you are.
Love it. Love it. And in the research realm, it's the liminal space between what's known and what's unknown. And I like the way you encapsulated that boundary of stepping outside your comfortable spaces, because that's where the growth can take place, between that known and unknown, that little window.
Yeah.
So
very little window.
Yes. So in parting, Patrick, I just love listening to you. I love talking to you. Again, we can go talk for hours, but do you have any happiness quotes or anything that you subscribe to or live by?
It's the one that I said earlier, and it is, and I use it interchangeably with greatness. Happiness is what you have going for you, perfecting it, and simultaneously eliminating all weaknesses.
Love it. Love it.
And that's really giving us intentionality about our happiness. What is causing our happiness to be drained? That's our weakness. A friend to our weakness is an enemy to our greatness. Wow.
Wow. I'm going to close out on that. For those who are more interested in Patrick Weaver's ministries, you can follow him on Facebook. Like I said, phenomenal speaker, phenomenal thought leader. And I encourage all of you to follow him and his ministry. He is based out of Oakland, California. And I'm so glad that our lives and the intersectionality of our lives and got to meet you and speak to you. And thank you again
Absolutely.
for speaking this evening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Take care, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.